So, you are very welcome back to the second episode of What Moves Humans, the podcast that examines everything that makes human beings tick across all of the health spectrum, so physically, mentally, and nutritionally. That hopes to demonstrate how all of these things interact with one another, and maybe just fills in some of the gaps in for yourself at home, just in terms of understanding yourself and why we have particular tendencies to do certain things and act a certain way, and is there more things behind these than just what is kind of tangible and obvious. So last week I gave an overview of what the podcast would be, and then also I tried to sort of give a bit of context in relation to where us human beings find ourselves in relation to the speed in which the world is developing. Which I discussed was that the world has been developing at an exponentially faster rate to how we've evolved as humans. So today I want to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into this and speak about the fundamentals of what every human being is born with and what actually every animal is born with in terms of the mind, and that is our instinctual system. We spoke about modern humans and how we're sort of about between 200 and 100,000 years old. We've evolved over 5 million years. When our earliest inception was on the earth, the sort of ape hominin, we had a certain set of guiding principles that every animal will find, and those are your instinctual system. And our brain grew, our brain hasn't grown, as discussed previously, our brain hasn't grown since probably 100,000 years. It's not like we've lost anything from there. What's grown is our ability to sort of reason and use cognitive reasoning. But those instinctual systems, they still very much survive at the base of everything that we do, and that could be described as the decisions you make at an unconscious level, or your reactive decisions, and we all know what reactive decisions can look like sometimes. So if I give you an instinctual system, like sort of tangibly, is when someone does something which you then say something really mean to them, and then you have regret about it, or someone challenges you and you sort of start shouting at them, and then you potentially you feel okay about doing it, but potentially you don't feel good because it's not a thought out planned process, it's just happened, and that's an instinctual decision. Instincts are an extremely powerful influencer in a lot of the stuff that we do, and it's by understanding these you start to sort of get a grip on the fact that there's a lot of decisions going on that you're actually making, we're just unaware of them. And now how this applies to the demands of today, and like I said, how the world has developed. And I think last week I spoke about or I mentioned this fact that for the first time in human history, more people die from overeating than they do from famine. A pretty amazing fact, and that's in 2014 there was 13% of the world's population was overweight and 9% was underweight. And I spoke about how that had never happened before. To look at stuff like this, you first have to understand that, and I'm sure most people will have some sort of idea of what the instincts are for, but I'm going to speak a little bit about what their primary functions are. So the instinctual system's primary function, its number one goal, is survival. And that is both survival of the individual and it is continuation of the species. And this drive can affect many, many different things. And this is from how we've evolved in over this 5 million years, and one of the primary drivers of the instincts is to preserve energy. The reason it wants to preserve energy is to maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is when we are in balance. And the reason we want to be in homeostasis is it means that we are not expending any excess energy, because we are adapted to the stress of what's been put upon us, what would have originally been physically demands, in the most efficient way, so we don't lose any energy, so we're not too weak, that it takes an excess of energy for us to carry out these physical tasks, or we're not too strong, so we don't have too much muscle, and muscle burns energy, so we just have the right amount to do what we're demanding of ourselves. So another cornerstone of that as well is to maintain a homeostasis, energy preservation, and stress adaptation. So if you put how you might understand it, if someone lifts weights, their body will change to try to adapt to that extra stress so they can manage, so they can lift those weights with the least amount of energy possible to maintain homeostasis. So those two things, homeostasis, energy preservation, and stress adaptation, are almost interchangeable. So how does that, if that is a primary driver, and I'm specifically going to focus on energy preservation today, how does that figure in with how the world is today? And I spoke about this first in man's history, where more people die from overeating than they do from starvation. So we've evolved over these 5 million years of always expecting to have a shortage of food. Also with this idea of preserving energy, is that we don't want to expend energy unless we believe it's an absolute necessity. So an instinctual reaction that you can potentially have is if you perceive something as expending energy, so something that's difficult, then your instant reaction will be not to do it because you're trying to preserve energy. Hunter-gatherers, and even all the way back 5 million years ago, they didn't go hunting for exercise. They did it out of necessity because that is what they needed to survive. Now, there's lots of different things. I can sit here with you, and if I got you to write out a list of your top 5 things that you should be the priorities in your life, and what should be number 1, and say we said 1 to 5, work, life, health, all of those things, how would you list those things? Now, this can be a little practice for you to do at home. Write that list out about what you think should be the things that you should be prioritizing. After you've done that list, and it's going to, I'm going to give the game away here a little bit, but then write the list of what are the actual realities of your life. So what do you actually prioritize first? How do those lists match up? And maybe they do, then great. If that's what if you've decided what's most important in your life, you do actually follow through on those things, then that's great. But for most people, that is often not the case. So what that sort of demonstrates is, even though we know a certain set of things, so today I'm going to use health and just as the example because it's an easy thing which everyone can sort of relate to, and health can span many different things, but I'm going to use it in the sort of more generic version, just for people to be able to relate to. So if I made the statement, if you're healthy, you'll do everything better. My assertion is that if you are the person yourself, is the thing that has to carry out all the various tasks you've got in your life, and that can be being a parent, working, managing people, whatever are the important things in your life. If you look after your health, are you more likely or less likely to do those tasks well? So that's my kind of assertion on this. Now, of course, feel free to disagree. It's not. I'm not saying this is. You have to take anything as I say as gospel, and you can sort of question what I say. But that is my logic and my reasoning behind that. That if you look after the machine, if you think of yourself as a machine, you got your computer and then the physical parts that have to take care of all the different tasks that are your responsibilities. If that machine is running more efficiently by doing a certain set of things, it's more likely then it's going to take care of those tasks with greater efficiency and with less issues. So, getting back to why sometimes we know something is a good idea and then we often have a problem following through on this thing. And this comes back to our instincts. So, in this energy preservation. So if we are hardwired to preserve energy, and if we perceive something as being difficult and we don't see it as a necessity, our instincts are going to say no. It's looking this as a luxury item, it will have an energetic deficit in us, and we don't see it as a necessity. But this can apply to work or trying to fix a relationship. Like if something is mentally draining, how physically and mentally draining that can be. If something where you have to concentrate really hard, you can be left exhausted. So if we have not built up this necessity of seeing things that are going to cause an energetic expenditure as something important, then our instincts, the reaction is going to be no, don't do it. And we've all experienced these things. So, those times when you want to go and say, for example, you're going to go and exercise. Your mind does all the mental gymnastics that it will do to say why you can't do it now, and will put barriers. No, you can't do it because you need to go to the gym to do this, so we have to make this big occasion. There's specific things have to happen for us to exercise, and this big hullabaloo. And it's kind of like throwing up mental roadblocks to ourselves as to why we can't do something. But deep down, we always sort of know, there's this thing sort of inside us, well, we should have done it. That's often, that's the sort of case for me, and many people have spoken to it, may be different for you. If anyone has read the chimp paradox, Dr. Steve Peters makes this, this assertion that we have this part of our mind that is our ape mind, and then we have our human mind. And I think he goes on with the computer mind as well, which is to do with reasoning. But if you think of this instinctual mind as like an ape, now an ape is 5 times stronger than a human in real life, and that instinctual side is 5 times stronger than your cognitive mind, because it is hell-bent on your survival. The problem being, obviously, is it is an old system that comes from this time when the driving things that it had were really important. The preserving energy, only doing things of necessity. Things have changed for us now. We always know for those lucky of us, but many of us know where the next meal is coming from. The problem is there's too much food, and even relationship to sugar. So, hundreds of thousands of years ago, not even, 20,000, not even 1,000 years ago, what would have been our primary source of sugar? Would have been fruit. We didn't have all these different options, and that would have been seasonal. These days, we have learned how to extract the sugar in a really raw form, even something like orange juice. So in a glass of orange juice, you might have the sugar from 5 or 6 orange juices in that one glass. We're designed, when we come across the sugar, to want more of it, because sugar is an easy energy source. It's easily digestible, provides fast energy. So I'm sure our ancestors would have gorged on fruit as much as they can, but they still wouldn't have been able to sort of take in sugar at the rate in which we're doing these days. And the problem is today is it's everywhere. But we've evolved to really want to really get stuck into sugar, even in terms of how we store fat. So again, we are, throughout history, our instinctual system has evolved in the norm being that we didn't know where our next meal was coming from. So we became very good at storing excess energy as fat. Now the problem is that we don't need these storing capabilities now, because we never have a problem. For the majority of us, we know where our next meal is coming from, so we're not really having this deficit where we need to store a lot of fat, but we're excellent at it. This is an analog system in this digital world. The energetic demands we put on ourselves, we're sedentary. So the energetic demands that are on our bodies these days are far lower compared to what they would have been. So these are all factors that figure in, but again, that thing is still driving us to preserve energy. So how do we overcome something like this? Well, first is understanding how your instincts work, and understanding that the decisions that you're maybe not aware of, how they're going on. So for many of us, what we try to do, this thing of like our ape mind, and we try to overpower it using willpower. And for many of us will have seen that in New Year's resolutions. So we decide, and maybe Christmas was a bit indulgent, or December, and we decide then that we're going to do dry January, and we're going to go to the gym 5 nights a week, and this is what we're going to do. And maybe that works for some people, but it doesn't work for many people. There's a number of reasons. First of all, I would say maybe this sort of night and day change of going from 0 to 100 is quite overwhelming. But the other thing is that, first of all, is that that we're quite, at the start there can be kind of quite a bit of excitement about it. It doesn't feel so hard. We're starting to get the positive feedback of exercising and things like that. But as the time wears on, this becomes very arduous, and we're just trying to force ourselves to do it using willpower. But we haven't convinced ourselves that this is a good idea. This thing that is using a lot of energy, we haven't seen it as a necessity. So after a while, the amount of times we go to the gym drops off, and gym memberships in the kind of bigger gym brands are predicated on this model of having people join and then only going for a partial time of the year, and then basically having a membership running which doesn't get used. So there's a couple of things that happen. First of all, overwhelm ourselves in terms of the big change in life, and secondly, we use willpower. Willpower, in my opinion, is a short-term solution. It is for when, I'm going to give an example, someone running a marathon, when they run out of energy in that last 3 kilometers, and they've hit the wall, and they've started metabolizing fat for their energy, which is, unless they're used to metabolizing fat, is a much harder thing to do than getting it from glycogen and carbohydrate. So everything's much harder, and the legs are heavy, all that sort of stuff. That is what willpower is for, is that never give up. But it's a short-term solution. It's your ability to keep going under duress. So working under duress, I don't think is a great way of coping with it, because sooner or later something's going to give somewhere else, either physically or mentally. So if this willpower doesn't work, then what are the options to us? Then we can look at trying to manage our instincts. And how do we do this? It's understanding first that there is a decision going on that is going to trigger us not to want to do anything that's going to expend energy. Secondly, we have to start thinking about these things that we know in ourselves, that we've already sort of talked about, that we know there's a certain set of things that are a good idea. We need to shift our perception of those to, are they necessity or are they luxury? So if again, using health as this sort of generic overall thing, is like, if I asked you, do you want to be healthy? Then you ask yourself, how long do you want to be healthy for? We do a lot of worrying about the future, about a myriad of different things. But most people, not until they kind of get into the later years, they don't particularly think about the future, because we kind of have this sense of, it's kind of hard for people to admit to themselves that they're going to die. But it's the only thing that we know for sure is going to happen, barring some other incident. We are going to grow older, and at some point, if nothing else happens, we will die of old age. But how do we want that to look? If we do stuff like exercise, if we maintain exercise for the rest of our lives, and do a certain set of things that we think are going to be good for us, more likely that time is going to be more enjoyable, because we'll be looking after the machine that has to carry out all the tasks. So setting goals in the long term, and of setting goals of that's a goal in itself. I want to have an enjoyable older age. That is a goal in itself. And so you start building up this thing in your mind that I do. There's some necessities there for myself. So I know if I look after my health, all the other things that I see as really important, I'll do those better. 2, I would like to be able to grow old in really good health, so that I can keep enjoying life and keep interacting with life in the way that I want to. If you've got kids, grandkids, any of that stuff, I want to be able to go out, kick a ball with them, whatever it is. It's setting these goals, but it's setting goals for yourself personally in the long term, the medium, and the short term. If we're setting goals in the long term, does it have to happen overnight? Do we have to go from 0 times going to the gym per week to 5 or 6 times a week? It doesn't have to happen like this. You bring in incremental change. This has a good effect on the instincts, because it's not feeling like it's being overwhelmed, and there's this small changes that are not requiring a massive energetic expenditure or not giving you too much hassle. It's manageable. And then there's the correlation. So anytime you feel better, or you feel the bump from the gym, or you see that you're relating to people better, and all of these things, and in terms of looking after your health across the spectrum, will all have an effect. So when you start getting a bump from this system, remind yourself there's a reason you're feeling good. It's because of the hard work that you're putting in. This builds a reward system. Your instincts work very well with reward system. If you want to see the purest example of instincts at work, speak to any toddler, it's so binary. It's like, I want it, and there's something that they want. I want that now, and there's no reason you can give me why I shouldn't have that now, because it's just about reward. I want it, I don't want it. So by correlating how you feel with the work that you're putting in, you're reminding yourself that the work you're doing is giving you a good payoff, and that feeds into that reward system. I wanted to start with instincts, and again, like I said, I've spoken about health here, about looking after your health, because it's easy to understand, and I think most people can kind of relate on whatever level. But I'm going to refer back to instincts a lot through the course of this podcast and the episodes, because there's so much going on with it that influence everything that we can do. Your communication, relationships, how you feel about yourself, your thought process. A lot of this stuff stems from this system's basic tenet, which is survival, and interacting with the new challenges that the developed world now places on us on this very old and dated system that's quite binary in how it sees the world. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'm going to be speaking about how thoughts are formed next week. Again, it's really important that you listen to sort of this idea of the instincts first, because this will give you like a good understanding of why it will make sense, a lot of the stuff that I cover next week. So thanks again for listening, and I'll speak to you next week. This podcast is sponsored by the Human Movement. The Human Movement facilitates your development of a framework for optimal objective decision making for your most subjective problems. Implementing more exercise, eating better, how you deal with your emotions, communication. The problems may change on the outside, but the framework in terms of how we're making decisions about how we go about things remains the same. 20-day course, which first of all explains exactly how we work, the mechanisms that can go into our decision-making process. Once we understand that, we can start making changes, and then it's about developing habits. If this sounds of any interest to you, for a free consultation and a full explanation of how it works, please go to thehumanmovement.com and book yourself, as I said, a free half-hour consultation, no strings attached, and see if there's anything there that might be of help to you.